We are now live. Welcome, everybody. We're here talking to Dr. Michael Goran, and let me know if
Hi,
I
everyone.
butchered that.
No, not at all.
Perfect. So we're going to be getting into all things sugar. It is a little overcast today here in Southern California. We're both in Southern California, so that's wonderful. And Dahlia, go ahead. Do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll
Sure.
get introductions out of the
I'm
way?
Dahlia Marin, registered dietitian nutritionist. I'm an integrative dietitian with a focus on plant-based nutrition and gut health for adults and kids.
My name is James Marin, integrative registered dietitian and environmental nutritionist. We are the co-founders of Married to Health, and we're excited to be joined by Dr. Goran here. And Dr. Goran, you can take it away with your introduction. You're have some amazing stuff going on.
Yeah, thanks. Lovely to meet you. And hello, everybody. I'm Michael Goran. I'm a professor of pediatrics and a professor also of population and public health sciences at USC. My research program is based at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And I run a research program there that has been looking for over 30 years to try and understand the role of early nutrition and diet during childhood and how that relates to long-term chronic disease risk. And we're also very interested in disparities and why that's different across different segments of the population. And I wrote the book Sugar Proof a couple of years ago to basically get the message out to families everywhere that came up from our research about the role of sugar in child health and providing families everywhere with solutions to help reduce sugar and improve child health.
What do you mean reduce sugar? There's not a lot of sugar in everything. And it's yeah, and as registered dietitians, I mean, this is something that has been on our radar since we were in college, since we were first getting into the field and learning about the field and going through our schooling. I mean, the amount of just added sugar. And I kind of want to start off, and we can all share our perspectives on this. And first and foremost, share that sugar is not a bad guy, right? Like sugar's not bad, especially when it comes to like fruit sugar. When we kind of give this perspective of like there's literally sugar coursing through our veins right now, right? There's glucose. Sugar is really the stuff of life, right? Insects love sugar, humans need sugar, plants make sugar. Like sugar is amazing. However, we then kind of cross the line into this overabundance. We then cross the line into whether it's genetic modification or these hyper refining or these synthetic processes of then further, I guess, making what we like or taking what we like on the sugar and amplifying it in ways. And that's where we then kind of cross over into this world we're in where like chronic disease is running rampant. And I think yeah, we can continue from there. But would we all agree on that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you put that really nicely. We're talking mostly about added sugars,
Right.
um, which could include fruit sugar, uh, the sugar being purified from a fruit in the same way that sugar is purified from sugarcane.
Mhm.
But we're not talking about eating fruit. We're not talking about the fruit and the sugar in dairy. We're really talking about the excess of added sugars. 70% of foods in the grocery store have some type of added sugar. 80% of products marketed to kids have some type of added sugar. There's really, where kids are consuming liquid sugar right, left, and center. Didn't used to be a thing.
Right.
Kids were usually hydrated from an evolutionary perspective on water and milk, and now we have juice and soda and energy drinks and frappuccinos and this and that. So it's really the abundance, and we're by no means trying to eradicate sugar. Some people are. We're not, because it's fun. Like there's a certain element of joy and festivity and celebration around sweet treats. And so what we're trying to do is kind of normalize it and find other ways to make uh, sweet treats without all of the added sugars, and certainly not without the synthetic sweeteners that you mentioned, and all of the over 250 different names for sugar that the food industry is inventing every day to try and bamboozle us. So it's really what we're talking about is trying to normalize it back to where it should be, not to eradicate it.
Definitely. And I love that bamboozlement factor too is something I definitely want to get into. And of course, anyone watching, depending where you're watching, if you have any questions at all, feel free. We are live right now. We will see your questions, answer your questions. And I know we've had questions from patients and people who couldn't make it to the live. And if you're watching this later, comment down below. But yeah, that bamboozlement factor of, for example, we were at the store recently with our daughter. We have a 7-year-old daughter, and we're seeing all this, they're calling it nectar now, right? So we're seeing mango nectar, and there's a passion fruit. Was it
They
passion
had
fruit
so many
nectar,
types of nectars.
pineapple nectar, and it's a different name for juice, right? Are you gonna?
And that's even something that our daughter was surprised about, right? I think most consumers are now familiar with high fructose corn syrup. I think that message has really been delivered and received, that most people understand high fructose corn syrup is not conducive to health really in any way, shape, or form. So consumers are now informed and they are looking out for these terms. I think now they understand sugar, right, is sugar. But, in the book, and you've talked about before, there are over 200 different names for added and refined sugars. And so it's always wondering, okay, what's the next up and coming trick? What's the next way where we're going to be duped into consuming these added and refined sugars in various ways that seem very inconspicuous, or oh, it's nectar sounds like something the gods would consume, right? But we're really starting to
Well,
see this, and I think us as health professionals, we're hyper vigilant to recognize it. But over our decade long career as dietitians, and even longer being in kind of this public health space, it really can become difficult to really dodge these landmines of the added and
right,
refined sugar
right.
that we're seeing. And, we're seeing year by year per capita sugar consumption continues to increase after, the whole low fat craze in the 80s and 90s. We're still, I think, on that sugar train. And I'm wondering, where do we see this going? Are we seeing any research trends that people are catching on? People are really turning things around. I'm so curious to know, when are we going to become, more in the know about the detriments of added and refined sugar? And I want to talk a little bit later also on it being included in, USDA supplemental programs like WIC and SNAP. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I'm
Let's do.
wondering.
Yes, that's absolutely. But let me just respond to what you're saying about the nectar. Like, so yeah, high fructose corn syrup, it's vilified. We know not to we know to kind of run away from it. But so why is high fructose corn syrup such a bad thing? It's because of the high fructose, right? Well, what if I told you that some of these fruit nectars are even higher in fructose than high fructose corn syrup? You take apple juice, the most popular example, plain old apple juice. It's 70 to 75% of the sugars in apple juice is fructose. That's much higher than the fructose in high fructose corn syrup in a soda.
Mm,
So we can start right there. So that this is really an issue that we think that because it's a nectar or a fruit juice concentrate or whatever, that it is good and healthy. But we really need to look out for them again, not to avoid like this. There's just so much of it. So apple juice, for example, is probably fine if you dilute it 50-50.
mhm.
And the commercial process just makes it so sweet.
Right. And I find that context matters as well. Like
Mhm.
our daughter is extremely active. She's an extremely healthy body composition. She's a very healthy child overall, but she's extremely active. She's in karate and tumbling and silks, and she's at school, and then she's in tech crew for like theater, and so she's like go, go, go. And that's how she likes it. And even when she comes home, she's like, Dad, let's wrestle and throw me up and do all this. I'm like, where
Oh
does your
wow,
energy
yeah.
come from?
Mm.
So for kids especially, I mean, we do give some juice in a form of like recipes, or we're a little bit more lenient with her, but we're definitely more balanced in the sense of we're very much watching the added sugars, but then also being aware of, look, if it's a friend's birthday party going on and she wants organic, healthier, no artificial color juice box once in a while, we're lenient in that sense. We're like, this kid's active, it's diluted, it's once in a while, it's in that balance.
Absolutely.
So we're very real with that as well and forthcoming with that. And it's also going to kind of a child who's on the like on the same par as like an Olympic athlete. She doesn't stop moving and training. It's like, oh my gosh. So she's using that sugar definitely. But what do you find is that balance for kids out of all your research, and like you're mentioning, like some apple juice 50-50 here and there? I mean, on that topic, for parents listening, like what is that balance? What is in the latest research you've been combing through, especially building this awesome book? What's the sweet spot, pun intended, for parents?
And does that coincide maybe with those guidelines set forth by the American Heart Association? Yeah, we'd love your opinion on that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think the issue is just being aware of how much sugar is in everything, the added sugars,
Mhm.
and kind of understanding that in the context. You used the word context, which is always a great word, in the context
Mhm.
of what food item is being considered. So we're not saying that as a parent you need to spend every moment counting every calorie and every gram of sugar. That I don't think that's useful. I think that could backfire. But I think knowing what the guidelines are relative to what you're purchasing and what you're offering your child is kind of important. And the guidelines. So there's several guidelines. The American Heart Association guidelines that you mentioned. I have one issue with that. It's a great starting point, but it's one number for all kids. And we know you have a 7-year-old, I have a 16-year-old, and a 19-year-old. So obviously, it's not a one size fits all because kids vary. So we came up with a different set of guidelines using the principle of the World Health Organization recommendation, which is 5% of calories as sugar. So there's always, nobody can do that mental math. I still have to like write it down and get my calculator out and try and figure out what does that mean. So what we did was we did all the mental math and came up with for a child at any given age from 0 to 18, based on their average size and their average daily energy, what does 5% of that look like in terms of sugar? And we have that table in the book.
Love it.
But on top of that, we also can say now we recommended this in the book, and since we published the book, dietary guidelines did something great for a change and recommended 0 added sugars for babies between 0 and 2 years of age, recognizing this really critical period of growth and development that we talk about in Sugar Proof, that there's really no place for added sugars. Again, that's added sugars. That doesn't include the sugar in milk or the sugar in whole fruit.
Right.
But
Totally agree.
There's a little bit of debate as to whether it includes the sugar in juice, even 100% juice. I include those as added sugars. The USDA does not.
Yeah.
Same. I think we're in agreement there for sure.
They're refined, right? We've removed them from the original fiber source. And so we know that they're going to interact very differently with so many processes in the body, but also with our gut. And I think it's interesting. What you're saying is, yeah, these guidelines do make sense. We also know that there is compelling data to show that the first 1,000 years of the gut are the
1,000
most,
days.
yeah, first 1,000 days, not years. No one's settled. But the first, 1,000 days of life are most formative, most important to the formation of the gut microbiota. And that's in utero, as well as, about the first 2 years of life. So when we're not really adulterating it with this added and refined sugar, that can potentially cause that shift in the microbiome. We're enabling the palate of the child to develop a little bit more naturally and lean a little bit closer towards those natural flavors of these natural foods, and for their gut microbes as well to be craving those natural flavors that come along with the gut feeding and gut nurturing fibers. So many things are coinciding with that, and it's great that parents will hopefully embrace those guidelines and have that 2-year period to really practice looking out for added and refined sugar, familiarizing themselves with what some of these words are for added and refined sugars and common culprits of foods that might hide added and refined sugars in them.
Right. And And on that note, I mean, with added sugars or just sugars in general, for any parents listening, watching, or later on, what are some of your favorite sugars? Like, what do you sweeten with? Like, or for your kids, whether they're 16 or 6 or 6 months, and we now know, under the age of 2, you're not really sweetening. However, there's fruit. One of our favorites is dates. But what are some of yours? Like,
And
what
some
is
of the
your
ones
kind of
that are
go
in the
to?
book.
And
We
they're in
love
the
the
book,
book,
but
and we love the Sugar Proof Kids Instagram page as well that shares great recipes.
yeah.
Yeah, so so in the book and on our website where we have even more recipes, sugarproofkids.com,
Mm.
we challenged ourselves to not use any type of added sugar at all or any type of sweetener. So our ultimate preference is sweetening with whole foods like bananas or dates. So for example, our sugar-proof muffins are made with there's no added sugar. They're sweetened with the banana and the blueberries. And so a lot of our recipes will do that, but that doesn't mean to say that's what I practice every day. So in my in my arsenal at home in my kitchen, I have honey, uh, which I'll like. We made a smoothie this morning for my daughter. Maybe we added a little bit of honey, which is fine because maybe it needs to just be a little sweeter, and you can control that with a little bit of honey. Uh, Maple syrup sometimes, coconut sugar sometimes, and regular sugar sometimes. So, we do plenty of baking, although sadly, the baker in our house is my older daughter and she went to college. So we're, we're missing our baker right now.
Yeah.
But for baking, what we say, if you're using just regular sugar and following a regular recipe, the easiest tip is just to cut the recipe suggestion by about a third or even up to a half. And when we do that, it's there's no real impact on the texture of the product. Yeah, it might not be as sweet, but you can also ramp that down gradually. So yeah, I do have those would be my top three added sugars: honey, maple syrup, and coconut sugar. But I also, if we're baking, we'll have regular sugar and just try to use less of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find, date sugars, and it's not really because there's really a lot of great companies. I'm blanking on the name of one company. We saw them at Expo West, but, they're basically dried dates that they grind up into date sugar, like a powder, and you see it's great. I mean, it's so grind it up that you just add it to like your tea, or if you do drink coffee, or easily to add to baking. I mean, even like whole like dried dates when they're nice and gooey, you're adding that to a baking recipe and it's so delicious. But like this the date sugar, which is the powder sugar of dates, it's so great, and you're still getting all that added fiber.
Yeah.
Um, and with that, or
Yeah, this leads us to this question. So we have
oh yeah,
somebody ask,
nice.
what is wrong with honey and maple syrup since they are already in their natural form? So, like we were saying, there's
Mm,
nothing wrong with these things, but yeah, we'd love to hear from you, Dr. Gorin, of why these would not be considered whole food sugars and what differentiates something like honey and something like maple syrup from a date or a banana that we are talking about. So, I know you talk about that in the book, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on this question that we have.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, gets into a little bit of a gray zone here,
Hmm.
right? But, they're still technically added sugars, but I didn't say there's anything wrong with them. I,
Hmm.
I use them all the time. I like the taste. I can control how much I add because it's in a liquid form. So it's definitely the preferred source, but it's still an added sugar. Yeah, they tend to be less processed. That's true, but it's still like considered an added sugar.
mhm.
Mhm. And I like to educate my patients on the same thing. They're still refined, right? We're not eating maple tree bark when we are having maple syrup. We are not eating part of the agave leaf. We are not eating honeycomb. Some people do, right? But we're ordinarily not including that fiber, that fat, that partial protein source along with it. So you are extracting that honey, that maple syrup, that agave syrup from it. So there is still somewhat of a process. And so, with that being said, we share the same opinion where in our home, those are considered kind of an additive. And not saying we never use them either, but it's something to be aware of and not in our opinions, consider an every single day food to have all the time and really recognize their role also in increasing cravings for some of those more concentrated sugar flavors and also the additional calories and the additional additives that they're bringing into your life.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and just to add to that, that goes into more like the trickery factor too of people being aware of like the not all honey you buy is this beautiful, pure, raw, organic honey or whatever you think it is, right? Honey is cut with, real actual honey from bees and also sugar syrup. And same goes with maple syrup. And I haven't heard of this too much in agave. Agave is pretty cheap and easily to refine and access. So I don't think they're cutting agave with like simple syrup or something like that. But I know with honey and with maple syrup that does happen. So it's knowing like, hey, not all maple syrup and honey are created equal. And then just again, context and a perspective of someone who's maybe their body composition is off. Maybe they are undergoing gut dysbiosis. They have SIBO or IBS on top of they're maybe overweight or obese and going, well, agave is healthy for me, or maple syrup's healthy for me, or honey's healthy for me. Let me have more of that. It's still, we have to understand that honey is bee food, right? Honey is there
Mm-hmm.
to feed bees, and bees operate at an extremely high metabolism. I think an article is something like 400 times their metabolism is 400x ours. So when you're eating a food that's for a creature that has a 400x metabolism than you, it is a highly, energy dense food, hence why it's so sugary and sweet. And so if you're, let's say, sedentary like we are, we sit in front of the computer quite a bit. We
We're
don't,
not sedentary.
I mean, we exercise, but come on, we do sit in front of the computer. I mean,
Mhm.
if we go back 100 or 1,000 years ago, our ancestors were way more active.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I was farming or having to go hunt for my food or anything like that. So, when you're looking at it that way, it's like, do you want to be consuming that much honey or maple syrup or
Mm.
agave? So you're more likely to get full from that apple, from that banana, from that date than extracts of
Mhm.
so-called
But
healthier. Thank you for watching this. We hope you know by now Married to Health really does everything we do coming from a need in our community, a need from our patients, a need from being dietitians for over a decade, from running our own private practice. And we continued that when we formulated Gut Nurture. So if you didn't know, Dahlia Marin, RDN, LD, CGN formulated Gut Nurture along with Complement. We truly believe it is a great complement for your gut health journey. Why is that? Well, it's low histamine, it's low FODMAP, it's organic, even the package is compostable. We really designed it with a patient in mind that is wanting to eat more plants, that needs to eat more plants, but is struggling to eat more plants. This is that bridge. We also designed it for the person who's just like, I want to boost my gut, I want to feel really good, I want to help with the structure, function, and population of the gut. This is unlike anything that's really out there in that as it's focused on being a prebiotic, not really a probiotic. So the idea here, you can think of Gut Nurture as compost for your gut ecosystem. It's not trying to force seeds and the probiotics in, it's trying to create a beautiful environment and a beautiful foundation. So any seeds you get from the fermented foods you're eating, from your environment, from the beautiful habits you're building, whether you're working with us or not, they are going to fall on this beautiful, healthy soil with this beautiful, healthy compost and create a lush, beautiful ecosystem and garden, creating an abundance of fruit and postbiotics that are going to keep you healthy and thriving. So click down below, learn more about Gut Nurture, and we'll continue with the episode.
so one thing with agave that you've mentioned a few times, which I did not include in my list, is because agave is very high in fructose. So
Right.
most agaves are about 90% of the sugars in agave is fructose. So that's why that can be a little bit of a problem. So I would not include that on my list. Honey and maple syrup are a bit more balanced in terms of glucose and fructose.
Mhm. And
Right.
I think we're speaking about this in terms of adults, but in terms of kids, when I previously worked with a pediatrician for several years, and we'll talk about that because it was in working with an underserved population, but oftentimes things like fruit juice, even if it's 100% fruit or these highly sweetened foods, if they're not quite as nutrient dense as a whole food is, you might not be capitalizing on the space that a small child has in their tiny tummy. And so, if we're filling that with these non nutrient dense, whether it is an added and refined sugar or a non nutritive sweetener that's been added to something, I think that we're just not taking advantage of that small space that they have and really trying to provide them with as much nutrient density as we possibly can. Where maybe instead of something with maple syrup on it, yeah, we're giving them a date that's higher calories for them, has higher fiber, has maybe a little bit more fat, has more minerals, micronutrients, macronutrients. And so that child is going to get a lot more nutrition into their body with something like a whole fruit rather than something like a fruit juice, which, like you said, Dr. Goran, lots of fructose. So, you know, not just for
Mm.
children, but also for adults might not only fill up that space, but also is a highly fermentable sugar. We know that, fructose is one of the FODMAP foods that is more fermentable. So, for some people, also, not only is this taking up space, it can also induce some gastrointestinal distress. And so, that's something we educate,
And
especially me being somebody who specializes in irritable bowel syndrome and SIBO. This is something I speak with my patients about, with just being informed on some of these more concentrated fruit sources and extracted fruit sources as being a source of FODMAP in their life as well.
that is going to be more problematic in children. And this is one of the things we get at in the book, trying to understand the physiology of a child being different from an adult. And here the issue in terms of fructose is fructose malabsorption.
Mm.
So we're not because fructose is not not traditionally a part of infant nutrition, since mother's milk has no fructose in it. Babies aren't even born with the ability to absorb fructose. So if a baby gets, or an infant or a toddler gets introduced to something that's high in fructose too early, they can't absorb it. So it's malabsorbed and therefore will be fermented in the gut and cause multiple gut problems. So this is likely a source of tummy issues, the classic problems of childhood, sore tummy. In fact, studies have shown that in many cases this is because of fructose.
Yeah, I know
That's
and
so
another
interesting.
deleterious effects, right? I would love for you to expand on that more too. I think it's so important for parents to realize this, and this is like we said, this is where really the most action is happening in terms of gut health, as well as the oral microbiome, as more and more research comes out. So we're talking like dental caries, as well as other
Baby
issues.
bottle tooth decay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
kids run into, but that is such a huge point where, I mean, just the basic logic of like breast milk is not, it does not contain fructose. If anything, it has more complex sugars. We're talking about like human milk oligosaccharides and these really cool complex sugars that we can't even digest, but guess who can? Our microbes. And so when we're looking at breast milk composition, we're finding out more and more. It's like, wow, it's really geared not only for baby, of course, but for the little babies inside a baby, right? The little microbes that are growing
Sure,
and this
sure.
ecosystem that's happening. But
Hmm.
what other are there any other like negative effects you found in your research as well, whether kids even through their teens that you've seen
Negative effects from too much sugar.
from, yeah, just too much sugar in general?
Yeah, they can really range in terms of effects on the body. They could be affect the body literally from head to toe. So it could be learning problems. It could be very subtle learning issues, ability to concentrate, for example, and skin development and skin rashes and acne. But then there's the long-term chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, which sadly we're seeing more of in children. Used to be called adult onset diabetes, but now it's seen across the age spectrum. And fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Most liver disease used to be due to alcohol. Now it's non-alcohol related. And that non-alcohol is sugar and fructose in particular. So these issues, cardiovascular disease would be another one. Might not see a lot of kids. We do see some kids with type 2 diabetes and fatty liver, but the process, the evolution of those chronic diseases, they start in childhood. They may be completely unnoticeable under the skin effects. We're not just talking about weight gain. We're talking about subtle effects on blood cholesterol levels or on blood sugar levels that are starting to kind of rise too early into the range of chronic diseases. So it's kind of like the putting the frog in the water that's not boiling. You won't notice the frog being distressed. It will be a very slow process, and that's the process of chronic disease development that starts early in life. And what our research and other research is showing, that if there's one thing that could be modified that is related to that, it's dietary sugar.
Mhm. And I
Huge.
think all of these concepts we as adults can understand. And one comment that I know we receive, and this is just kind of our anecdotal story, but one thing that we're often asked is, how do you get your daughter to eat that way? Right. And one thing that we like to say is we don't get her to do anything because I can't get her to put her shoes away every day. So clearly, there aren't things I can force her to do. But she gets it when it comes to nutrition because as parents, we try to make it a collaborative effort. So not only are we modeling the behavior, and we really believe in the principles set forth by Ellen Satter, who's a really brilliant dietitian and outlined the division of responsibilities, right? So we as caregivers, we're in charge of what food comes into our home, and when and where we're eating that food. But our daughter is in charge of how much she eats and if she wants to eat it or not. But we also implement those things and then we educate her. We're very passionate about educating her. And so, sure, as a younger child, maybe some of these concepts were a little bit more elevated above kind of her educational level or ability to understand. So maybe we're not talking to her about added and refined sugars. They simply aren't present in the home and she's none the wiser. But now she goes to school, right? She's in first grade. And so now she's coming home, she's coming back and asking questions. Why are my friends bringing this to school? Or in my after school program, they gave me these crackers, these Belvita crackers, or what is this? So now she has her own set of questions. And now that she's really understanding more of these concepts about reading and math, we're having more expanded conversations with her of, let's talk about how much sugar is in 1 teaspoon. And so we'll kind of lay it out for her in that way of, okay, this is something you're asking us about. This has 6 teaspoons of added sugar in it. Do you want to eat that? And she'll often kind of understand that's a large amount. And so she on her own will come to that conclusion of, I might not feel my best. I don't really feel as calm and peaceful when I have added and refined sugar. It sometimes hurts my tummy. So no, I don't want to have that food. And so teaching her how to read ingredients as well and look out for some of these added and refined sugars, so she herself is an informed consumer. Because I think that people have this thought that because yes, we have this advantage and we recognize that we are both dietitians, so we are both on board with it. But we really are encouraging her to make her own choices, because I often have other mom friends or my patients or whoever is saying, can you have your daughter teach my child how to eat? I want my child to hang out with your daughter so she can teach them. And so I think it's so important for us to really, one, empower parents and caregivers to understand more about these added and refined sugars, but really include kids in the conversation. So that's something I really love in the book, how it's really family centered. And then, like I said, I love the recipes that you all have available on your website. You have them available on your Instagram. And I love how the children are the ones who are preparing the recipes, because that is an automatic buy-in for kids when they see their peers. Studies have shown that children are more likely to make healthy choices when they see their peers or they see their parents or role models modeling the behavior. So what are some of your favorite tips, and what are some of your favorite strategies, maybe for somebody who isn't starting off from scratch with their child understanding these concepts, and maybe their child is 7, 8, 9, and they're wanting to start implementing some of these things? What can be strategies for the caregivers, and a couple of things that the kids can glean from that?
Yeah, no, I think just to echo what you said, and that getting the kids involved, we wanted to put a lot of focus on that. So I think you're right on there. Well, but your situation is very different from many other people's situation, like you said. So where do you start? And we get this question a lot. So suddenly, It might depend on where you are on that spectrum of sugar intake, but I think one place to start is to look out for all the hidden sugars in processed foods that you might have as your kind of staples, like peanut butter, pasta sauce. There's so many of these processed foods sneak sugar in there, and we don't even know it's there. So there's a way you can probably eliminate a lot of sugars pretty quickly. Um, in the book, we also have a lot of very simple hacks and tricks about I already mentioned one, using less sugar when you're baking, or what you put on your toast in the morning, or the type of cereal that you buy, or diluting your juice. You already said not bringing it into the house. That's a big one for things like soda and juice. That's one of the easiest ways. That we're not saying you can never have it again, just easier if you just don't bring it into the house, and then maybe it's something for parties or when you're out for a meal or something. But small hacks are things like I said, what are you going to put on your toast for breakfast in the morning? It doesn't have to be jam. Or what are you going to put on your pancakes this weekend? It doesn't have to be maple syrup. Maybe you'll load up the batter with a bit more fiber, a bit more protein. So really, this is not just about taking away the sugar, but trying to rebalance the nutrient density profile that you mentioned earlier. And you can do that by adding fiber. There's lots of great sources of fibery sprinkles you can put in the pancake batter or on top of your cereal or on top of your smoothie to increase fiber, increase protein.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of different things like that. And it really depends on the context of your family. Maybe you have a family who's on board and they're going to go for it, lock, stock, and barrel, and take us up on our 7-day no added sugar challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
if you do that, you're going to learn a lot about where all those hidden sugars are and what it's like to go without them. And the first few days are going to be tough, but at the end of the other end of the hill, once you get over that initial struggle, parents are reporting brand new kids that they didn't even recognize because their disposition is different. Or you might be in a family where you have a very resistant partner, or your kids are not on board, and you might have to go a bit stealth under the radar. And we have strategies for that too.
Totally. We would be so on board if you guys did a massive, we could get so many people on like a no added sugar challenge and do that. That would be so cool. So many health providers, even just here in SoCal, but even across the globe that we've met through Instagram, we should all get on like this huge challenge. That'd be really cool. Just a thought, putting it out there into the universe.
I've
But
embarked on my own. So for
Super.
Lent, I gave up added and refined sugar completely. So for the
yeah,
entirety of it, and we don't really have added and refined sugar in our home. And so for me, I thought, oh, I'll be fine. And it was interesting. Yeah, going out to meals and going out and not sharing a dessert, even if it had maple syrup or whatever, with friends. Or one thing that I also learned was one of the breads that we had been purchasing for our daughter when we first started buying it. It was sweetened with a little bit of apple juice. So I think it had 2 grams of added sugar per slice. And I looked at it recently because I was going to have a slice, and I realized, wow, they've replaced that with cane sugar. And now there are 4.5 grams rather of added sugar
Wow.
per slice. And so, I have been on my own journey, but yeah, I would love that. I love that campaign. And it's interesting.
That's a great
Also,
idea. We should talk about that.
we're
let's
all
do
for
it.
it. We'll
We're all for
champion
it.
this campaign if you're
Great.
on board. We'd love that. But yeah, it is interesting. It's interesting to also see, where can I make those slight improvements? Because I love the challenge and kind of really understanding what that looks like to really challenge yourself and push yourself for those 7 days and understand the role of the added and refined sugar in behavior and in cravings and the amount of food that you're eating. And also for people to kind of see where do they fall on the spectrum, like you said, what type of environment are you in? Because it's very difficult to send a changed person into an unchanged environment. So if they are maybe that only champion for that change in their home, where are some of the areas that maybe we can go from good to better to best, and what are some of those practices that we can convince others in the home of along the way. And in talking about that, I know I had alluded to it earlier of saying, James and I both in our careers have had opportunity to work in the public health sector and work with underserved populations. So we've both at times in our careers have worked with the WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children, whether directly or for me indirectly, working in a community type clinic. And so we became very familiar with, WIC, which is support, not only nutrition education, which is wonderful for those receiving WIC, but also receiving funds. And these are government supplemented funds to purchase foods. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on, there's great, there's the good, maybe the not so great of all these things. But I loved what you said with the new guidelines, kind of recognizing no added and refined sugar, recommending no added and refined sugar from 0 to 2. So I'd love your thoughts on if you feel like that will make it into programs like WIC, or SNAP, and what your thoughts are on some of these programs and your experience in them for maybe people who aren't as fortunate, or perhaps people who are receiving supplemental funds from these programs.
Yeah, I think that this is where I spend a lot of my time, because my research program is almost entirely focused on disparities and studying these issues in lower income populations, in Latino populations, where this really is where we have the majority of the problem in terms of obesity and chronic disease risk among diverse populations. So that's what I've focused my research career on. And we're working with WIC. We have a number of different projects and analysis underway, and I think they've done a great job. They have in the last 2 years revamped their program. It's a shifting landscape, right? We're learning a lot. I always tell people, my mother smoked when I was in the womb, and smoked when she was breastfeeding me. She didn't know that was such a bad thing. Now, of course, we do. And we're same fast forward 50 years, we're learning more about how nutrition consumption during pregnancy and in early life might affect the offspring. And so it's a shifting landscape. And I always like to say that because I'll talk about formulas with added sugars, for example, and mothers feeling guilty. Oh, well, I fed my infant added sugars. What am I going to do? I feel terrible. And you're just trying to make me feel guilty. And I'm like, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. Like, I'm not trying to make my mom feeling guilty because she smoked when I was pregnant. It's new information. So my hope is, to come back to your question, that WIC will change with the times and change with the knowledge, but it's very slow. And, we come back to this whole issue of juice. So juice is still available in WIC because the USDA doesn't recognize it as an added sugar. It still provides formula with added sugar because formulas are exempt from having to be classified as added sugar. So if a formula maker puts corn syrup solids in a formula, the USDA says they don't have to list it as an added sugar, even though we all know it is an added sugar. So our most recent paper was a study looking at the impact of formula with added sugars on early development, showing that it impacts on eating behavior, causes babies to become more food fussy, more picky eaters, less enjoyment of food. We want to look at how it's affecting blood sugar levels because corn syrup is a much more glycemic sugar than lactose, than what's in most other formulas. So I think to answer your question, I'm a big supporter of WIC and SNAP, but I just wish that they would be more flexible and more nimble in terms of adapting what they do relative to the new research that we're showing on the impact of these things in early life.
And this is really it, right? It is like governments, we have to remember governments work or should work for the people for the most part. I know that's a whole nother episode or a whole nother talk of just lobbyists and
sure.
all the
Yeah.
power they have. But really there's more people than lobbyists, right? There's more families who really want the best for their kids and their overall health than lobbyists. So I know a recent statistic is there's 20 lobbyists for every elected government official. So that's crazy. They're outnumbered 20-1. So there's a lot that goes into this. But at the end of the day, the more that people are educated, the more, I mean, that was amazing, because when people understand this and go, wait a minute, we exempt these really they're food companies. We exempt these companies and food companies from listing the added sugar in the age range that is the most affected by added sugar.
It's absolutely outrageous and shocking, but it's not really that well known. So this is a big campaign of mine right now to get that out there and get it addressed. And we're doing the research on it as well. And there's more papers coming. We're working with WIC, because WIC, the great thing about WIC is they have all the data. They know exactly what, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids were fed. Well, they know what they were given through WIC, and they're keeping records on the outcomes. So we're working with WIC to try and analyze some of that data to try and figure out the impact of some of these early decisions on food on outcomes. So it's really
impact.
Yeah, so it's really it outrages me.
Totally.
It's totally incompatible. On the one hand, the USDA is saying no added sugars from 0 to 2 years of age. On the other hand, they're saying, yeah, but you don't have to call it an added sugar.
And here's some added sugar. We're funding it for you.
Yeah,
we'll provide it for you. And I know James worked in public health policy, so he got to see that fun side of all the red tape.
Talk about frustrating. Oh my gosh, that's why I got out of it. Because I'm like, I'm just like pulling out my hair here, because I work closely with USDA grants and WIC grants and NEOP and what was once Champions for Change. They switched to NEOP. Maybe there's something else now, and I always called the USDA a schizophrenic person, because it has multiple personalities, where at one side it's like anti-obesity and let's give more kids fruits and vegetables 5 a day. Then on the other hand, it's subsidizing sugar crops and saying, oh, we give exclusions to added sugar for certain companies, and they're funding basically added sugar and letting lobbyists kind of infiltrate. So it's like, which one are you, USDA? What do you want to do here? Do you want to fund obesity, or are you trying to fight obesity? Because you really can't do both. And that's kind of what it's doing. It's serving multiple masters when it should be just serving the people. So that's it's a whole nother.
And I would have confused consumers, because in working in that public health setting and in working with the underserved population in cities like Santa Ana and Pomona, a lot of my patients and the parents were receiving benefits from WIC, which was wonderful for them. But, I just looked at the food package earlier today, and, there are allocations. So for different ages for children, and then for women, whether they are pregnant, mostly breastfeeding, exclusively breastfeeding, or not breastfeeding at all, they're given certain allocations of amounts of food and juice. I heard you mention juice, and, I kind of came up with this. So if a woman is mostly breastfeeding, and say she has 2 children from 1 to 5 years old, that family right there would qualify for 300 ounces of juice per month. And a lot of my families I was working with were saying, well, you're telling me not to drink the juice. But when I was working with them, WIC was giving checks. Now they give debit cards, so it might have changed, but they were not allowed to use the check to buy fruits and vegetables unless they got everything listed on the check, which was also juice. So they would say, I have gallons and gallons and gallons of juice in my home, and you're telling me not to drink it. What do I do with it? It doesn't feel right to me to waste it. And so, I would educate them on get tomato juice. That qualifies for WIC, and you can cook with it. That can be a nice broth that you're using. But it really is. It's trying to navigate the system, even of WIC, of saying, let's try to get plain yogurt rather than the added and refined sugar yogurts that are available through WIC. Let's try to not get frosted flakes, and maybe let's get the puffed rice or some of these other iron fortified cereals.
And on that, I know there's a lot there, but I want to see that we have some more questions coming in. So I love to try and get, and it's on topic. So another question on juice, which is, what is juice from concentrate, and do you recommend avoiding it? So the difference between, maybe this question's kind of asking like fresh juice versus juice from concentrate. Did you come across any research on that, Dr. Goran, or any major differences there that you
Yes.
found?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's not great research specifically on fruit juice concentrates, but it's one of these issues where comes back to your mango nectar from earlier on. It's juice concentrate sounds pretty healthy, but really it's not much different from if you take sugar cane, you get cane juice,
Hmm.
and then you evaporate the cane juice to a concentrate, and then eventually the sugar crystallizes out. So it's the same thing. We're just using apples to begin with instead of sugar cane. So we're taking the juice, we're concentrating it, and then eventually the sugar will crystallize out. So fruit juice concentrates are more problematic actually because they're even higher, can be higher in fructose if they're from fruits that are high in fructose, such as apples and mangoes that we mentioned earlier. So we're seeing a lot of fruit juice concentrates in the market. Now they're even calling them different things, like you mentioned, the nectar, because a lot of people are onto it. But either way, they're very concentrated sugars derived from fruits in the same way that regular sugar is derived from something that's grown, which is sugar cane. At the end of the day, to the body, it's still the same thing, but it might be a bit worse because it might have a bit more fructose in it.
Thank you so much for watching this video. We know you're probably getting quite a bit from it. It can be a lot of information, can be overwhelming, and we totally get that. Dahlia was there not too long ago suffering with IBS and SIBO-like symptoms. She was hunched over very often, bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, skin issues, hormonal issues, the list goes on and on. So we know this. We've been in practice now as registered dietitians for over a decade, and we created our Good Gut SIBO IBS program for you. If you're experiencing IBS, SIBO symptoms, IMO, SIFO, the list goes on and on. If you're like, I'm not really sure what this is, click down below. We have a free assessment for you, and that'll likely lead you to our Good Gut SIBO IBS program, which is chock full of information we wish we had. It's information that we're giving to our patients, so it's all at your fingertips in one package. It's 7+ hours of video. It is dozens and dozens of handouts. It's tailored meal plans and recipes to truly help you get to the root, to truly help you understand what's going on so you can truly heal with each meal. Check it out down below.
So, and again,
Yeah.
it also tends to, the concentrate tends to be devoid of the fibers and many of the phytonutrients, and is ultra processed, so it's been highly treated. And one of the best tricks we have again is, you know, making fruit compote. So take a bag of frozen blueberries and just boil it down yourself for 20 minutes, and you'll get like a jammy, fruity blueberry thing that you can use like a jam. But all the blueberries are still there, so you still have all the fiber hasn't evaporated or been taken out. So that's something easy. And if you add some chia seed to that, you can make it thicker and more like a jam. So we have to kind
One,
of take this on ourselves sometimes.
one of our favorite recipes for sure. And we throw a date in there
Mm.
too while it's
Yeah.
reducing in that like compote, and just make a little nice sweet jam. It's delicious and
Mm.
amazing. Yeah, but wonderful points. And yeah, we do like to give that comparison of how many apples or blueberries or whatever the juice is, mango nectar juice or whatever it is, how many mangoes, because you're still getting the sugar and calories from that mango, how many mangoes went into that juice, or how many apples went into that juice. And it is, when we really compare logically to our patients, we go, how many apples can you eat in one go, right? In one serving? Maybe I could eat 3 if I was like really hungry, like 3 big apples. I'd probably eat 3 and be like, I'm sick of apples. Like, okay, that's enough apples.
Exactly.
But you could easily drink like 5 to 10 apples juice worth, right? Sugar from 5 to
Yeah,
10 apples.
a 12 fluid ounce glass of apple juice is about 3 apples. Three
3
depends on the
right.
size of the apple, but nobody's eating 3 apples. Nobody's even eating 2 apples. So I mean,
Right.
I've done it a few times just as an experiment to see what it's like, and It's not much fun. It's not, like you said, you'll be hate apples and you'll probably have an upset stomach because of all, all the sugars. And it's just, first of all, it's a lot of sugar concentrated. And the reason why eating an apple is okay, not just because there's a lot less sugar, but it's slowly released. So the apple is like a bio, it slows down the bioavailability when you eat the apple. So it's not just less sugar, but it's slowly released. And it's that slow release that protects, that prevents the buildup in the liver. It slows down the absorption. I see the picture of the gut behind you. That's where the absorption happens. So that slower the release of that fructose from the apple, because you're chewing it and it's being released from the fibers, it slows it down as compared to drinking the apple juice, which is just like, you might as well just have a massive bolus infusion of fruit sugars.
Yes. And take that a step
Very
further
different,
and concentrate it.
very different metabolic scenarios from those two situations.
Totally.
Very different.
And yeah, just a couple comments on this because it's so interesting. And overall, there is a difference, between fresh or like cold pressed fresh juice and concentrate juice, where you have to understand there's three ecosystems to a plant, whether that's an apple or mango. You are getting living microbes on the outside. There is this external microbiome. There's also a internal microbiome into each plant cell, like within the tissue, as well as the soil and root system microbiome. And so this plant, if it is fresh and you're still juicing it, you are still getting some of those benefits. You're not heat treating, you're not using that pasteurization and canning process, or even other chemical processes as you do in those concentrates. That fresh juice is retaining, for the most part, the intracellular microbiome and those nutrients there. So if I did have to choose between an apple juice concentrate and a fresh apple juice, I'd probably go for the fresh apple juice, still dilute it a bit and have it once in a while. But the microbial benefit you're getting from fresh juices is still there, in which there still needs to be more studies on, but it's a fairly newer idea. But that's something really cool to think about as well.
And what I like to educate my patients on is maybe you are having that cold pressed fresh apple juice, but hopefully it's being juiced along with vegetables. So
Oh yeah.
juicing is not a preferred method at all. Hopefully you are blending the whole apple and retaining that fiber. But if you are doing that, 75 to 80% veggies, and maybe there is that small percentage of that cold pressed fresh apple juice. So there are so many spectrums, right? That we talked about, from going from the whole apple that you're chewing, then it goes to blending it in a smoothie, then it goes to juicing it and mixing it with veggies, and so on and so forth. But I think the more informed that we can be as consumers, just the more empowered that will be to apply this information. And then, of course, teach it to the next generation, implement it through all ages and stages of life, whether we're teaching that to our children or teaching it to pregnant women, or, continuing from there. And so conversations like this really excite us. It sounds like we have some interesting questions based on the conversation that we've had, and that time has flown by, but we've brought up so many interesting things. And I think one of the most interesting things, all of it was interesting, but you saying really that babies don't have that affinity and that capacity to really digest fructose because their gut microbiome might not be ready and might not be available to start digesting fructose at that young age. And so somebody's asking, what is an appropriate age to introduce fructose and train a child's taste buds to not crave for sugar? So it sounds like two questions, but yeah, what would be then that appropriate age physiologically where maybe the body is ready to start processing fructose?
Yeah, it's a great question. Two great questions.
Mhm.
In terms of the fructose, so what's missing is an enzyme called GLUT5, which is the transporter in the gut that absorbs the fructose from the gut into the bloodstream. Babies aren't born with it, and we don't know exactly when that GLUT5 starts to be turned on. It probably gets turned on when more and more fructose gets consumed, just because it's kind of becomes overexpressed and gets turned on. I don't know what the appropriate age is. So if giving kids like mashed apples or something like that, they're going to get some fructose there, and that's perfectly fine. So I think, whatever developmental stage you're choosing to wean onto foods like that, I think is probably appropriate. But I would try to reduce fruits that are higher in fructose, such as apples, and focus on fruits that are lower in fructose, like berries, for example. So that's that thing. So I don't think there's any exact age that would be appropriate or not. And the
Yeah.
second question, I just don't have an answer for. I wish I knew. If we had that, if we knew exactly how to train a child's taste buds to not crave for sugar, I think we'd all be in a better place. But I think what we have found is that babies are born with this preference for sugar and preference for sweetness. That's natural. That's evolutionary. It's supposed to have them like breast milk and avoid food that had turned bad and seek out good calories. But that also was not developed for the food environment that we're now living in. And as soon as babies are exposed to sugar, including starting in the womb, that babies exposed in the womb to too much sugar can be born with an even higher preference for sweetness. So we we do know that preference for sweeteners can be magnified, but we also know it can also be dampened down pretty quickly. And that's why that's the big benefit of doing the no added sugar challenge, is to basically dampen down that magnified, amplified over preference for sweetness, and it can change pretty quickly. And once you do that for even after 7 days, you're basically resetting that preference, and you're waking up all the other taste buds in the mouth that have basically been shouted out by too much sugar, because sugar and sweetness is such a powerful activator of taste receptors. It basically drowns out all the other tastes. Because if you have for example, a blueberry muffin from the store, you're not going to taste the blueberries because it's just so sweet. But if you dampen down your sweet taste preference and take all the sugar out, you can then taste the blueberries in a blueberry muffin.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
way to train it that I know is just to go off sugar, not completely, but just periodically for the 7 days to reset the system.
Mhm. And so important to realize like how efficient our bodies are. Like our bodies are going to decrease that production of enzymes that metabolize different forms of these refined sugars. Our oral microbiome and gut microbiome, all the way from the mouth to the anus, shifts as you shift your diet. Like we've seen this in studies, and that's where we came up for a little tagline for our private practice, which is heal with each meal, because we've seen that a meal can literally shift that gut microbiome. Like we can see those shifts. We've seen the studies where even a course of antibiotics can completely shift that microbiome, and even the human genome. For some time, it has such an impact on these microbes, and these microbes are directly connected to how we're digesting, how we're tasting, how we're thinking and feeling while we're eating, and even after we eat. So huge ripple effect there for sure. So yeah, the power of just going, instead of this blueberry muffin that has tons of added sugar, if I'm sweetening it with banana and dates and the blueberries, and going from there, is so powerful. So that is massive.
Mhm.
Wonderful. I think maybe we can get to one more question. Let's see what this one is. Oh yeah, it's like a perfect question right here. Where would you suggest reaching out to get educated on how to avoid added sugar? Here it is, sugar proof. A wonderful book, super comprehensive. If you're looking
Mhm.
to like, oh my gosh, all these added sugars in my kids, and there's daycare, there's school, or if you're in WIC or SNAP, and all of that and beyond, no matter what pay bracket you're in, there's added sugars there that we're just being inundated with, whether it's at Air One or Food for Less, you're finding added sugars. So this book is super comprehensive. It's a great read for the family, very applicable. So it's not super like like sciency where you're not going to understand it. It's giving you recipes,
Mhm.
it's giving you real world applications. I want to do something with the 7 day sugar challenge. We'll have to think about all that. So, we can get tons of communities to join in this and really just understand sugar and the impact a lot better. Yeah, so that's great. So that's what you
Any
can go
other
to find.
resources that you'd have to share?
Yeah, well, we've also got the website,
Yeah.
sugarproofkids.com, where we do publish recipes periodically. We're always developing new recipes. If you have any ideas of recipes you'd like to see, we like to kind of be challenged by family favorites, like things you'd like to make without added sugars.
Yeah.
And so, our most recent famous one was the Cadbury's cream egg. We have a Easter cream egg with no added sugars, just as an example.
Nice.
So go to the website, sugarproofkids.com. Follow us on Instagram at sugarproofkids or Facebook at the same tagline. And it's a changing landscape. So there is some stuff in the book. That's the most comprehensive place, but also check us out on Instagram and the website.
Perfect. And those links are down below. If you're watching this a little bit later than the live, those links are down below if you can click. So this was wonderful. If you enjoyed this, comment down below, like and subscribe. Definitely follow Dr. Goran and his team that are doing such amazing things and really shedding light on this topic and giving, like I said, applicable real life recipes and tangible assets for your family to use, which is always great. Thank you so much. This was amazing. We got to do this again because we didn't get into like stevia and monk fruit, and there's so much more with sugar. So, but this was excellent.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. People always want me to talk about sweeteners, but it's a whole other talk. But I'd be happy to do that because that's also very important issue and very confusing for many people. So let's do that sometime soon too. I'd love
So
to.
it sounds like
we'll have to do part two.
Yes, for part two.
Part two,
Absolutely.
sweeteners, stevia.
Yes.
All
yes.
that and so many erythritol
Non-nutritive
and
sweeteners.
Yes.
sucralose, all that. So yeah, but thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dr.
My
Goran.
pleasure.
Dr.
My
Goran.
pleasure.
Wonderful
Thank you so
talk.
much.
All
Thank you
right.
for having us on, and thank you both for having such a great site and doing such great things to get the message out. You guys are doing fantastic. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Mutually appreciated for sure. Well, everyone, happy Friday. We'll talk to everyone soon and have a great day.